inundation. I can't remember the other terms that kept coming up. What were some of them?
Just the permutation on all of it is the flood aspect. We have the walls of mud and the people, all of the detail levels, which go to people being forced to camp out on their roofs and barbecue like that sort of thing.
Right. Okay.
These are all modifiers to the flood meme.
Do we have? Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I would say that appears to be the disaster du jour, so to speak, for 2009, the way that we ran into traumatic winds in 2008.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask what the time frame on the wetness.
It really starts in the winter of this year in terms of the accrual pattern of the data beginning to shift from damage due to winds over to damage due to flooding, persistent flooding, stationary flooding, and it's like in many cases it's being described as non-temporary, near permanent, all of these other modifiers.
All right. Does this occur in terms of your research on the data you've been able to gather with all of your little spider friends over a short period of time or over a term when it becomes more exacerbated over that time frame?
It continues. It's a long-term, we're going to have to live with it for a number of years kind of climate shift.
All right. Let me ask you to hearken up images of the Canary Islands volcano, which is split and sitting. Friction is the only thing really holding it on the island shelf now. And that entire volcano, if any of you listening have done this, just type in Canary Islands volcano catastrophe or something like that. You'll see it. The Canary Islands are surrounded by very deep water.
Extremely so, yeah.
And if this volcano, which is split apparently 3 meters wide in places, it's a crack. And 2/3 to 3/4 of it are ready, literally, to fall off the Canary Island it's on and into the water. And
in fact, it loses bits and pieces all the time.
That's right. Now, if the whole thing should go, it would unleash a tsunami across the Atlantic, which I don't know if you have the particulars on or not, but it's 500 miles an hour, 200, 300 feet, something like that.
There's actually been some debate among hydrologists as the maximum amount of tsunami-forced generated water rise you could sustain without breaking. In other words, the rise they're suggesting most typical tsunami that could ever be generated wouldn't go much more than 80 or 90 feet. This would be due to earthquakes and plate shifts like we saw in Banda Aceh. However, the displacement kind of a tsunami, you could generate waves potentially as high as 200 feet. But so far, unless you're talking meteor, that level of displacement, there's no way you can get a 1,000-foot wave to support itself as it goes over obstacles like land and the continental shelf.
Understand.
Still, 200 feet, I mean, let's be realistic. That's not going to be fun.
That's plenty. I don't know what your research and reading has shown, but could the Canary Island volcano generate something like that, which would span the Atlantic and slam into the eastern coast?
It could, but we also get the same kind of emotional language, for instance. This is our problem. It's the ambiguity of language and the potential for diverging reads. So we could get a read that suggested that there's going to be all kinds of flooding on the East Coast and to a certain extent on the West Coast as well, that we're going to get large amounts of displacements of people, that there's going to be all kinds of anxiety and stress and what we call release language, which is everybody running around wailing and moaning, so to speak, bewailing fate kind of a thing. But it could be true just as easily from a 3-foot rise in water that continues and continues and continues, rather than some kind of large precipitous event, both of which could span 5 or 6 or 7 months until we, quote, adjust to it, and we could not tell the difference within our data stream. Does that make sense?
It does. It does indeed. And in fact, the images that you put in the reports are rather suggestive of something like that, not an enormous precipitous event, but something that
is nonetheless still to a certain extent catastrophic, because a 3-foot rise in water, for instance, that continues on a tidal basis can overwhelm the major ports of the world and shut down global shipping.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. That's one of the themes that George and Clif have come up with time and time. How long has that theme been running through the?
At least 2 years now, and that's the worrisome part. There's this postulate that George discovered this phenomena early on, and we formulated it into this thing we call the Ure postulate, which is that the earlier we see an event, which is to say the longer it continues to build in our data pattern, the more impacting it's going to be on a larger number of people.
And the more likely it is to come in and to play.
Correct.
Okay.
For instance, the Banda Aceh earthquake and tsunami, we actually started picking up earthquake and 300,000 people kicked back to a previous age some 9 to 10 months earlier. We got that language.
Was that the language? 300,000 people kicked back to a previous age?
300,000 people impacted, perhaps dead, comma, slight new subject or new phrase, and then the nation kicked back to a previous age.
I got you.
So
wow, well, that's pretty damn accurate.
As it turns out, that was the 300,000 was oft repeated in the media, and so to a certain extent, we don't have a dial-in on the actual event. What we have a dial-in on is the words that are going to be used to describe it after the fact. This is where the ambiguity comes on in. So, for instance, we might see something that suggests a pole shift. Year 2011, lots and lots of trouble. Okay, but are we actually getting information about an actual pole shift or some kind of an event that triggers people all over the planet into discussing that, such that maybe something happened to the planet Mars or whatever, it was visible, and it got everybody on the planet Earth talking about it, and thus generated all that language in the media, which we're kind of picking up the early feed on, if you will. And we couldn't tell the difference from this vantage point.
Now remember, the language that they're picking up is speaking to what we call the future.
Correct.
It's reflective of things to come. It's precognition, as it were, in random. Well, it's not so random.
It's not random. That's the issue.
It isn't.
Yeah. Obviously, it's not, because there's patterns that are visible. It's very fractal, too.
It's the antithesis of random. Now,
organized, if you will, but then you go to the issue of who organized it and why, and so on. And we don't get into that. We're just bumbling around trying to use it.
Yeah. All right. Now, here's a question. How much, since you have to program around the controllers trying to sew these kinds of things into the Internet consciousness, the mass consciousness, for whatever reason,
right?
How often are you seeing this kind of thing? Is it a common occurrence?
I don't know in particular, because it's not a problem anymore since I've got my heuristics worked out. I haven't messed with it for probably about 30 days or more. But I was getting to the point where it was annoying 18 or 20 times a week. But on some days,
a lot of stuff. That's a lot of noise to put out there. Wow.
On some days, like I say, some of the latest horrific school shooting where 32 victims, and then the shooter were killed for a total of 33. That started several days that day and then continued for several days after, and there must have been several hundred episodes of it.
Really?
Yeah, so it's concentrated around those kind of emotional days. Robert's energy's got to go somewhere, so they have trying to magnify it or redirect it, or who knows. I mean,
they're trying to manage it.
Answer.
They're managing, they're manipulating it somehow.
Correct. The evidence seems to point to that.
All I can come up with is, and the only logical thing is that they are trying to intensify.
You're assuming it's a logical universe, or their actions are logical.
Well,
not necessarily the case.
I have to start there somewhere.
Well, we find that their actions are frequently easily determined because they are deterministic. You can see them. They're ascertained by that.
Okay,
so.
It's pretty straightforward then. All right. What a scene. Back with the ever-fascinating discussion from halfpasthuman.com with Clif High in just a minute. So understand that those who are controlling us are using the Internet in ways that, again, unless you were listening to this program, you'd never expect. Okay, now since you've programmed them out of your world, so to speak, at least as much as you want to, you're getting the true spontaneous read from the collective unconscious, hopefully uninterfered with. Are we still looking to October 7th? Is that still showing up?
It is still within several hours of the spot that we'd originally pegged.
7:25 a.m.?
Or 7:10.
7:10 a.m.? What time zone?
UTC, Universal Time Coordinates, which really is it's the heart of the Illuminati. It's the Greenwich Mean Time.
What would that be, Pacific time?
8 hours earlier. We're 8 hours behind the sun crossing the meridian that Greenwich is on. But basically, so we would be looking
in the early afternoon.
For us, probably around 1-ish, yeah. We should start seeing, but see, it's a range. We had just picked 7:10 because it was convenient. The number was easy to handle, and it